Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today in session 69 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I have two quick announcements to make, and then we'll get right to our interview with Martha Gabler. The first thing I want to talk about real quick is that I am delighted to be working with the folks from the Himalaya podcast player app. If you're like me, you've been frustrated with the declining user experience in the native Apple podcast player. It seems like every update that iOS makes, the podcast app gets worse and worse. Sometimes I open the thing and it's like, where are all my shows? Or I have to go navigate this here, there, and everywhere. So I've been looking for some alternatives. I've discussed a few in the past. Right now I'm using Himalaya. And if it's something that you want to give a try, you can go to the Google Marketplace or Google Play Store or whatever it is, or the iTunes or the App Store, and give it a whirl. I'll have links to Himalaya in the show notes. You can just type in Himalaya and it should pop right up. Give it a go, and make sure you follow the Behavioral Observations podcast once you have it on your device. So, other thing I want to mention is that this episode is brought to you by Behavior University, and we talked a little bit about them a few episodes ago, and what their objective is to bring university quality instruction to those of us in the field who are trying to fulfill our professional development needs. So you can learn more about them at behavioruniversity.com/observations. So on to today's episode. I am delighted to be joined by Martha Gabler, and we're going to talk all about TAGteach. And this is like many episodes we have here. I'm talking about something, or she's going to be enlightening me about something that I know very little about. So this was a very informative conversation, and I hope you find it the same. So I'll try not to be redundant and duplicate Martha's background here, because she goes into it and does a fine job talking about herself. But she comes to this podcast with a wealth of real-world experience, and I think you're going to enjoy her story. Along the way, we mentioned tons and tons of resources, and those will all be in the show notes. And I suppose one last thing I should mention as well is that I email the show notes to every episode out to my mailing list. So if you're not on the mailing list, you can go to behavioralobservations.com, and there's like a little red square on the right-hand side, and you can just kind of sign up for the mailing list, and I will email you the show notes to every episode. So you don't have to go to behavioralobservations.com to look at the show notes. You can just wait for them to get sent directly to your inbox. So anywho, I think that's it for opening remarks. So without any further ado, please enjoy this fun conversation with Martha Gabler.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Martha Gabler, welcome to the Behavioral Observations podcast. How are you doing today?
Great, thanks. Looking forward to this.
Oh, same here. I've been very excited to chat with you. We're going to talk a lot about tag teaching today, and this is an area of behavior analysis that I'm pretty ignorant of, and so I'm looking to learn a lot about it. We've had lots of listeners request episodes about tag teaching. You know, we see things pop up in Java once in a while, and it always seems to be applied to something like dance or football or something like that. But I also have seen it applied in what we might consider kind of mainstream clinical settings. So again, this is one of the fun things about doing this podcast is being able to pick people's brains who are really knowledgeable in this stuff. So again, just welcome to the show, and thanks for taking time out of your day to chat with me.
Well, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to it, and it'll be an interesting conversation.
Great. So let's start with, I guess, where it all started. So how did you get into tag teaching? Where did you discover it? What came first, I suppose, tag teaching or applied behavior analysis, or did they arrive together in your world? So just take a minute and tell us about how you kind of got into this area.
Well, I basically got into TAGteach because I was absolutely desperate. I have a son with autism. He has severe autism. He's profoundly nonverbal. And he's 22 now. So I kind of found out about TAGteach when he was about 6 or 7 years old. And we had no access to any kind of professional services. ABA was not available. And we were really desperate because he had very difficult behaviors. He basically had four or five behaviors. He would run and stomp and scream in the living room all day. He would spin and bounce, and he would hit his head and bite his hands. And he did this almost 24 hours a day. And that was his repertoire. So it was very difficult and, very depressing. And I had learned about applied behavior analysis and verbal behavior therapy and all those really great things. And of course, we never had access to professionals. We never had access to money, to the funding for it, no way to get it. So basically, I had to sit down with the books and learn how to do that myself. I learned how to do discrete trial. I mean, I taught myself. Mm-hmm. And how to do discrete trial. I had some people who had a very good speech therapist who was just beginning to learn about this herself. So she and I kind of worked together. And, she was teaching herself and then teaching me. And so I became somewhat knowledgeable about everything at that point. And as we were going through ABA and verbal behavior, and my son made great progress with those things, I found out about direct instruction curricula because I said, how am I going to teach him to read? She handed me a copy of Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons by Siegfried Engelin. I got involved in the direct instruction listserv. And then one day in the direct instruction, and then I got in, from there, I found out about precision teaching, got on the standard acceleration listserv. And then one day on the standard acceleration listserv, there was this tiny little side comment in a big comment, a reference to Karen Pryor and her work on training. I thought, training? I thought, well, my son could use some training. I'd never heard of Karen Pryor, but I looked her up, and I'd never heard of clicker training, but I got her book, Don't Shoot the Dog, and it all just fell into place because it showed me how I could communicate with my son. My son is still very minimally verbal. But at that time, you can't imagine what it was like. Unless you've lived it, you don't know what it's like. And we had no way to communicate with him other than kind of holding him down. It was horrible. So I realized that with the tag, I could communicate. It's a conditioned reinforcer, and then you follow it up with a reinforcer. So I read the book. I ordered the taggers. I got my little bag of treats, and then, so it took me about 2 weeks to get it all assembled. I finally had it all ready one morning. I walked downstairs. He erupts into a massive tantrum. Of course, I didn't know why, but I thought I followed my clicker and TAGteach protocols. I thought, well, what do I want? Of course, he's screaming and jumping around. So I thought, I want him to be quiet. I want him to not be jumping around, so I want both feet on the floor. I don't want him hitting his head, so I want hands down. So I started tagging and handing over a tiny piece of some kind of candy for every split second of quiet mouth, hands down, or feet on the floor. And I was very nervous while I was doing that. My heart was pounding. But 12 minutes later, he was sitting on the sofa with his hands folded and looking at me, and he had this look on his face like, how did I end up here? How did this happen? And I had done nothing because I had stood back, and I just tagged and then gave him a little treat. And so then I was amazed because I thought, I just de-escalated this tantrum in 12 minutes by doing nothing other than pressing a button and handing over a piece of something or other. And that was it. That was how I tamed that tantrum, or it de-escalated. And I never had to fear tantrums again. And when he did have tantrums, I used this procedure. The tantrums de-escalated, and the tantrums decreased, significantly in intensity and the number of times that they happened, frequency, I guess, intensity and frequency. And that was very dramatic, because I was able to communicate with him what behaviors I wanted. So
Wow.
I increased his calm behaviors, and then that set off the whole train of experimenting or me figuring out how to use this tool to deal with the horrible problems we were having because we couldn't sleep. Going to the grocery store was a nightmare. I couldn't take a walk around the block with him because he would bolt in a million directions at once, and it would take two of them, one would be circling on the right of him or the other circling on the left, or you'd have to hang on to his hands, which is, not pleasant. And so I taught him to do all of those things. My next big project, I think, was I taught him how to go for a walk with me and how to take one step at a time and to take steps in the same direction, because that was something he could not do. He could not take two steps in the same direction. Take one step, bolt one direction, then another step, bolt in another direction. You never knew where he was going to go. So once we were able to walk, well, then we could walk around the block, and then he could get exercise and we could get fresh air. And it's all described in my book, Chaos to Calm, how we went through these procedures. And as I was working with the tagger and realizing, for me, it was easy. It isn't always easy for other people to learn new things. And but for me, it was easy because I just followed the TAGteach protocol. What do you want? What behavior do you want? Then I would break it down into whatever the movements would be, the specific small steps. And for example, you always want your kid to be good, but what does good look like in this situation? Yeah. And when we're walking down the street, good behavior to me is walking pretty close to me, walking in the direction we're going, walking at a good pace, not dawdling, not bolting, and coming back to me when I called his name, so that he would return. So that to me is good behavior in a walk, when you're out walking.
So you use the tagger and you saw an immediate outcome from it. So that must have just been inherently reinforcing for you, and that started the rabbit hole trip.
Yeah, exactly.
Were there, and so I just want to recap a couple of resources that you listed here just to make sure. So you were using, so it was Karen Pryor's "Don't Shoot the Dog." Right. That was the, I guess, pivotal work. You mentioned some other type of some other books that you were using prior to that. Kind of teaching yourself behavior analysis with. Are there any other resources that were noteworthy, that were helpful? Perhaps may or may not be related to TAGteach specifically.
Well, I think that's a really good question. And you have to go back in time about 18 years ago, pre-internet, pre-Google, pre-Facebook. There was very little information available. And even the way people who are behavior analysts now talk about behavior and things, that kind of language wasn't being used back then. It was very much LOVAS and drills and keeping a child at the table for 40 hours a week and the family having to spend $60,000 a year out of pocket to do these drills. There was really no explanation for parents of how to increase a behavior using positive reinforcement. There was no concept of shaping. None of this language was there. And I had to try to pull it together from various not so great sources. And but just that core concept that you can increase a behavior by reinforcing it. I mean, assuming, of course, it's a positive reinforcer for the child or the learner or whatever. That never was ever clear in all of that, at least not for me. But then, that's how it looked to me as a parent back in those days, struggling, trying to figure out what to do with all of this. The other big resource that was a huge help, of course, was, there's lots of great ABA and VB materials. Back then, there wasn't that much available. I don't remember what they were. I used the Catherine Maurice book initially to get started, Let Me Hear Your Voice. Mm-hmm. And then there were lots of handouts, as I recall, for the verbal behavior stuff and booklets.
Okay, that's fine. I having been in the field for a little while, try to be a student of the history, if you will, of the
right.
field. So I was curious because obviously I know that like Mary Barbera's book, which is would have been perfect for you. That wasn't out then, and other types of resources weren't available. So I was just curious what was available at that time, particularly from a parent who presumably is not plugged into the community. Yeah,
never heard of it.
So, awesome. So you discovered this really powerful teaching strategy. And it sounds like you got him to calm down by reinforcing, I guess, the things that were, incompatible with the problematic behaviors, and then you got him walking nicely beside you. And so, what were some of the other things that you started to work on, and then I guess take us forward from there in terms of your evolution with tag teaching? And you mentioned your book earlier, and so I'm assuming there's some bit of story between this point in the history and the timeline and where you are right now. So,
well, the safe walking was a huge thing, and it's important when you can take your child out safely in the community, then you can go places. So it opened up his life too, because then we could safely go to the grocery store, to the park, to the playground. We could go for hikes in the woods. So it really opened up his life and gave him a lot of fun things to do. So that was the big thing. And then the next really difficult project that I tried to attack was the sleeping, because, of course, we had the notorious sleep problems that so many families have. And I thought, okay, there must be a way to use this. And I thought it through, and I thought, okay, well, what do you do when you sleep? Well, when you sleep, you have your head on the pillow, you're under the blankets, you generally have your hands and your legs flat on the mattress, and you're exhaling. You're not bouncing on the bed, you're not screaming, you're not running around the room, you're not doing any of those things. So I parked myself outside his bedroom, and my new tag points, or the points, the behaviors that I was going to reinforce, were quiet mouth. Of course, quiet mouth is a big one. Head on pillow, yawns, any either arms or feet flat on the bed. So every time I could see that one of these was happening, I didn't use the clicker, but I used a little flashlight. I flashed the light into the room, went in and patted him, a little pat on the shoulder, then went out again, in and out, in and out. It took like 3 hours, 4 hours a night for the first month or two. And it was very exhausting, but he did learn to sleep. And I had to keep doing it over and over again over the years, because it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to sit in a child's room for 3 or 4 hours at night and sit there with your little flashlight and sit next to the screaming child and wait for a split second of that child to stop screaming, or a split second of that child to have a leg flat or an arm flat on the bed. But I did that, and he learned to sleep.
Did you have to... So I guess I have two questions related to that. One is a more broader question, I suppose, about just establishing the tag as a reinforcer in terms of the, I guess, ratio of backup or primary reinforcers that are connected to it. And maybe what I'll do is I'll save that for a second, because I want to go through the steps, if you will. Yeah. But my other question related to that story is: did the flashlight? Do you think the progress was slowed down or slower than perhaps some of your other projects, as you call them, because the flashlight was not as strong as a conditioned reinforcer as perhaps the clicker was, or was this just a more intractable pattern of behavior that just took longer to tackle?
Well, it was a very difficult behavior to tackle. That's one thing. And also, I thought the flashlight did a fine job, because you can't have clicker going on for 3 hours at night in your house when other people are sleeping.
That's right.
You simply can't do that. And you have to have a quiet way to reinforce the behaviors. And it's the flashlight is one of the standard alternate markers that we recommend if you need that for some reason. So, for example, a person with hearing challenges may not be able to hear the tag or the click. So in that case, you can use a light. You can use a flashlight that has different colors. So maybe they can see that even in the daytime, if it's a red light or an orange light or something in the flashlight. So as long as you're quick with it, that's the whole thing. The point of the tag is to hit that behavior as it's happening, because we know that's the fastest way to reinforce the behavior. If you can reinforce it while it's in progress, then the learner learns faster, right? You don't ever want to have delayed reinforcement. We know that slows down the learning process. And that's the marvel of the tag or the click or the flash or whatever you want to call it, is that you can literally, we say, catch that behavior. You can't reach out and grab it with your hands, but you can catch it with this little device. And once the kids understand the tagging process, which happens pretty quickly, then they know, oh, it's that thing. I've seen my son, stand back like with a look of comprehension just glowing on his face. Oh, so that's what you want me to do. And he just understands it.
Are you in need of continuing education? Well, Behavior University is a BACB approved continuing ed provider, and their mission is to provide university quality courses and ABA for new and experienced professionals alike. Their live webinars generally have a limited number of attendees so that the learning experience is highly interactive. And if you can't make the live events, these webinars are recorded and available in Behavior University's CEU library for later viewing. Behavior University also has a 40-hour RBT training. This self-paced course uses a combination of visual presentation, audio lectures, and live video models to teach all areas of the RBT task list. The course is accessible anytime and from anywhere. So if you'd like to learn more, head on over to behavioruniversity.com/observations, where you'll find a 10% discount for podcast listeners. Again, that's behavioruniversity.com/observations, and thanks for checking them out. So let's we've touched on it a couple times, different elements of it, but let's just go through and list out the components of tag teaching that I've seen, as I've seen it described on your website and elsewhere. So.
Well, TAGteach is an approach that is completely based on the scientific principles of applied behavior analysis. It uses positive reinforcement to increase desired behaviors. And what you do is when you see the desired behavior, you tag, you hand over the reinforcer. And of course, all the good ABA procedures have to be in place. The reinforcer has to be something that the child desires and is willing to work for, and you have to see that the behavior increases over the long term as a result of your reinforcement procedures. Also, you're supposed to look at the behavior and you're supposed to break it down into component parts, and then you can decide whether you're going to teach something as a forward chain or a backward chain and all of that good stuff. So it's about the purest ABA that you can get, because you're using this positive reinforcement to increase the desired behavior. And it's really what Skinner and his graduate students did in 1943 when they were on the roof of that building in Minneapolis and were teaching the pigeons to bowl. They did use an acoustical marker. So this is a real ABA. This is going back to the early it and you can use it. I always say the applications are only limited by your imagination, but it is ABA. The one thing you do is you add in this marker, which increases the precision of your communication, which is very important with learners who cannot communicate. Like my son, he can't communicate with me with words. I can't communicate with him with words. Words were never an option. So that was a powerful driver for me in using this, is that I didn't have any language.
I see.
So how do I communicate with this child when language is not an option?
Getting back to your comment about Skinner, I seem to recall reading somewhere that he used camera flashes.
That was for the dog.
For dog
that
training.
Was for the
Yeah,
dog.
yeah.
The article about the dog climbing up the wall, the Dalmatian, that was in the 1950s.
Yeah, so that was just another point of contact with an alternative tagging, mechanism. So, just doing a little bit of background research on this before coming on the show here. I was just looking at some stuff. I know a lot of stuff is in tag teaching is used for, or at least the published articles are used, have been demonstrations of. I've seen everything from dance moves to yoga poses to blocking and tackling in football, and also like daily living skills. Things along those lines. Are there other applications of TAGteach that you're aware of in the published literature?
Well, toe walking in autism is one where it was proven to be quite successful. We have a TAGteach reference list. It's on the TAGteach website, and it lists over 40-some studies and all of that. There are several on autism. I don't have them all at the tip of my fingers right now, but they are there on the reference list. I think...
Martha, can you remind me of the website? Is it TAGteach.com?
TAGteach.com.
All right.
And if you go to the resources, you can find the TAGteach reference list. One of the published articles was on teaching play skills. They found that TAGteach improved the acquisition of play skills for some children with autism. And there's another recent one that's going to be added. So people are doing research in this area, but of course it's like everything. It's takes time to do research and it takes funding.
Yeah, definitely. Are you aware of any investigators that have a program of research in tag teaching right now? If there's
not some. I wish there were. I think there should be, because I think the kids learn a lot faster, and it's really much easier to learn as a novice or as a non-ABA professional, because it's somehow very easy to press a button. I mean, we click on the internet all day long, and we select on the internet all day long. Do you want size medium or size large? Click. So we're used to clicking for what we want when we do online shopping. And here you can click for what you want with behavior of a child. So I even have an article about that, how they're exactly the same concept.
Oh, for sure. What's funny is I tell people, when some people ask me about my podcast and they talk about how many people listen to it and whatnot, I can actually go on the podcast host and hit the refresh button, and it shows in real time updates the number of downloads, and it does get pretty, it's very operant, especially after I publish a new episode, that I could refresh that quite a lot, and you can see the more the downloads added. So yes, I totally relate to that. One of the things I'm really curious about is the social validity of using TAGteach, particularly with children, particularly with children in vulnerable populations and things like that. I'm certain that you've been asked this question a gazillion times, but if I were to broach the idea of using some sort of TAGteach intervention with children that I'm working with, I know someone's going to make some sort of analogy to dog training. In fact, we just did a whole show with Hannah Brannigan of the Drinking from the Toilet podcast, and we talked a lot about clicker training with dogs. How do you get around that? What are some things that you've found helpful in terms of helping people understand that?
Yeah,
essentially behavior is behavior, and I know that for us, we can kind of intellectually we can logic our way out of that. I have to imagine that for some parents, that probably strikes some emotional chord that might be difficult for them to see through see their way to the science of what's going on.
Right. That's exactly it. Because as a parent, so bombarded with so many difficulties in this situation that then to feel that your child is being demeaned is, just adds so much more bad things to your life. But what I think the best thing to do is just expect that and say, yes, I acknowledge and I understand why you feel that way, because it may seem demeaning to use the same procedure with your child that people are using with other animals. We use the same medical procedures with both populations. I mean, nobody objects if their child gets a shot because their dog has gotten a shot. Nobody objects if a child gets a surgery and a dog has gotten a surgery. So there's that whole comparison. And the same thing with medicines. We give our dogs medicines, we give our children medicines. That's not always that easy, but I say it has been proven over years to be extremely successful with animals. I say, and it's not always only used with dogs, but it's used with killer whales. And tiny petite ladies like Karen Pryor can go out and train a 2-ton killer whale with, well, not a clicker, but a whistle. So it's a very powerful technology, and I explained that people have used it with animals and have seen how successful it was, that they realized we have to start doing this with people. And TAGteach came out of that. And then particularly for the autism population, what I also point out is that, well, many kids with autism are nonverbal, or even if they talk, their language doesn't have that communicative function to it, that they may not understand what you're asking. They may think you're asking for something else. And with TAGteach, you can demonstrate exactly the single movement you want them to do. And if they're capable of imitating, they can do it. But TAGteach allows you to communicate with a child without words. So you're not adding to the confusion of that child's experience. Let me back up. I'm sorry. Let me say it a little better. So we know that children process speech. Children with autism tend to process speech more slowly than typically developing peers. And there's research that they tend to see human movement or motion in their environment as happening faster than it actually is in real time. So you have a child who's out of sync with his environment. So how can you cut through that confusion and tell him that one little thing you did right now, that one little thing, that's what I want you to do again. That's what TAGteach enables you to do. Another thing that is powerful with parents once they think about it is that when we speak, and Karen Pryor has a great quote about this, when we speak, we put all of our human emotion and our state of being into our language, into our verbal expression. So the child with autism has to fight his way through that, because you're telling that child how you feel, whether you're tired, whether you're hungry, all of that information about your state of health, your state of mind comes through in your language. So that's yet another sensory burden that speech places on a child with autism. So why burden them? Why burden them with this? Why not just get straight to the point, or straight to the tag point, as we like to say? You can lift all of that. You can allow them to just concentrate on this sound, because this sound is like a trail of breadcrumbs. Oh, you did that right. I did that right. I did that right. So they can focus on the sound, and when they know that the sound means they did the right thing, that's very that's very enlightening for the children. It's that aha moment. Oh, like this is a guide for me. I can follow this. So those are all what I would say is particularly the emotional burden of human speech and the clarity of the communication. And then, yes, it has come out of animal training. It's been extremely successful with animal training, and it's been in the human training world for over 20 years at this point. People have been using it. It's long been used with children with autism. It was used with the New England Center for Children over 20 years ago, very successfully. And now humans are using it all over the place. The orthopedic surgeons are using it. I don't know if you're familiar with that article.
Yes, I am. And I will is it Levy? Is the
Yes, Dr. Martin Levy at
yes.
Montgomery Medical Center. Yes. So surgeons don't mind using it because it helps them learn faster and more accurately, and they retain what they've learned for longer periods of time. It's a very scientific approach to teaching, and I think the huge expansion into the medical field that's happening now is a very strong point in its favor.
All right, so we covered the social validity piece.
It's still hard though, because there's, as you say, it's that gut reaction.
Yeah,
and I think you just have to accept that and say, I understand why you're feeling that way, but let me give you some facts.
Yeah,
and then
I think if people are willing to kind of at least give it a trial, and you take really good kind of pre and post data, and if you see some change based on that, that's great. So let me ask kind of another, I guess, what we call a contrarian question. So I've worked with tons of kids, and we've been fortunate enough to resolve lots and lots of behavior problems over the years, all without using a tagger. So just to be kind of devil's advocate here, what am I missing? What am I, I guess, what is the rationale for someone who is a current practitioner and who generally is, has a history of, resolving behavior problems successfully using the, function-based treatments and things like that are recommended by, the various practice standards and things like that?
Well, this is very much a function-based treatment. I didn't have that luxury of having that information about functions when I was working with my son. But I would say the precision of the communication, the easing of the burden on the child, I think people should try it. I think they may find that they are communicating more effectively with the child. Also, it forces you to break down your steps even more. I know that that's a big point of training in ABA, but many times there's another little action or a movement that has to be done to complete a task correctly. So it's the pinpointing of the task, and most of all, it's the timing issue. You're never going to reinforce late. You're always going to be reinforcing exactly the right thing with this. So I think it would speed up the learning of the children.
I see. When you say pinpoint, it did remind me that there does seem to be this kind of relationship between the precision teaching community and tag teaching.
We love each other.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a 2-day workshop with Rick Cabina this time last year, and one of the videos he showed, and it wasn't the point of it wasn't to talk about tag teaching. It was an exercise in us kind of translating operational definitions into pinpoints.
Yes.
It was kind of like a before and after video of a student who was really giving the staff a run for their money, and he was using. I think it was like, if I recall correctly, he said he was using a tagger, and he could just kind of, and I think it was like a tone generator or something like that. It was like a little beep or chirp or something like that. Anyway, it just, when you said the word pinpoint, it just brought that exercise, that scene right back. So you guys are pretty tight with the PT folks.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we even have an article on the TAGteach blog and my blog about a tag point and a pinpoint. What are the differences? How are they the same? How are they different?
I see. Well, since you brought it up, I guess so. What would be the difference? Because we have talked about pinpoints here, so longtime listeners will probably understand, the nomenclature. But so what are so the pinpoint is basically the action verb essentially of what you want the learner to do, like writes letter on page, and think or something like that.
Tag point might be pencil on top line.
I see.
So we might break it down. I have to say I haven't looked at that article lately, so I'm a little bit.
Here's what we'll do. Is that on tagteach.com?
Oh yeah. I can send you the link. It's right there. But,
All right. So what I'll do is I'll put that in the show notes of this episode,
Sure.
both that article and the reference list that you mentioned earlier, and any other resources that I've got a running list of stuff that we've talked about thus far. So, cool. What advice do you have as it relates to pairing the tagger with primary reinforcers? And how, obviously you have to establish the tag as a reinforcer through pairing. I'm curious to see what your experiences have been, both as a parent and also as, a trainer and things like that of, the schedule of thinning and, how thin can you get and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about that process and what you've learned over the years?
Yeah. Well, with my son, it took 25 seconds. I had a little strip of fruit roll up, and he was sitting next to me on the sofa or something, and I just clicked, gave him a little strip of fruit roll up, In 25 seconds, he understood that this meant he was getting a treat. That's all it took for me. And then just about 2 years ago, I was visiting a family with a young adult daughter who had some, problems with a lot of screaming and some grabbing, and mostly the noise was so difficult for the family. And in 20 minutes with a clicker, and I thought she might like little fluff balls, so I had like bags of little fluff balls and soft things. The minute she stopped screaming, I gave her a little fluff ball, and in 20 minutes she was quiet.
Oh, like a tangible thing to manipulate?
No, just that was the reinforcer.
Okay.
Because I didn't know her. I didn't know what she liked. I mean, this is just sort of informal.
Sure.
There were no. Just
so getting back to your son for a second. So did you have to repair that at any point in time, or is that's the click is a reinforcer forever, at least as it relates to his your?
Oh yeah. And then of course I use it so intensively that he's always aware of it.
I see. And do you tag on praise or anything like that on top of that, or do you just let the tagger do the work, if you will? Where does any kind of verbal praise come into the picture, if at all?
Well, that's a really good point, because my son could not endure listening to speech. If you tried to talk to him, he'd run away screaming. So verbal praise was never something we could do. I do it now because he likes it. But we always recommend, certainly when you're getting started, just let the action of the tag and the reinforcer do the job. And then, of course, as a child gains skill and gains competence, then you can add the verbal praise. But, as you know, verbal praise is not always reinforcing, even for typically developing adults.
Oh, for sure.
So you have to go through that whole thought process and think, well, does the child like that? And does it increase the behavior over the long term? So we are pretty firm in the TAGteach community. We really always recommend giving a tangible, and of course it can be tokens, and it can be that kind of thing. And whether you've got 10 tokens or 100 tokens or whatever it is, your system, the tiered reinforcement system, those all come into play. That's often what's done in these sports settings with gymnastics and basketball and so forth. They earn 10 tags, they get a ticket, and then they get 10 tickets, and then they can get a Skittle and that kind of thing.
I see, yeah. So, I was curious if, you could establish praise as a reinforcer, as an adjunct to all the other levels of reinforcement going on for someone. Yeah.
Yeah, but basically, I think what we're missing here is that the tag means you were right. It always has only one meaning. It means you did it. You accomplished it. You were right. So as soon as you hear it, you were right. So for the more sophisticated learners, they don't need any additional reinforcer because they want success. The surgeons want to know that they tied that complex knot correctly. They don't want a Skittle. So, and with the gymnasts, they want to know that the leg or the arm or whatever is in the right position. And when they're the gymnast is going through a loop, through a jump on the balance beam or something, she needs to know right at that microsecond, when is she pointing her toe at the top of the jump or whatever. So when she hears it, she knows she got her toe pointed at right where she's supposed to. And that's the thrill. I mean, that's why people enjoy TAGteach so much, because they know right away, hey, I did it.
So I have to get you in touch with a guest I had on, was it the previous show or 2 shows ago? Dr. Paul Gavoni, 2 shows ago. He trains boxers and mixed martial arts fighters, and I asked him if he used tag teaching, and he's like, no, I know of it, but he hasn't really used it in that context. So but that sounds like it would be a perfect application, because if someone's sparring, you don't want to interrupt that with yeah, for sure. Are you aware of tag teaching being used at this just occurred to me, at like a group level or a classroom level?
Oh, yes, very much. And we get questions about that all the time. People say, well, I can't have 10 taggers going off of the class at the same time. Well, you can, because when a child is on the receiving end of this, or a student, they're so focused on their own partner or whoever is coaching them with the tag, they're so focused on that they tune out everything else. So you can have 10 or 12 taggers going off in the classroom at the same time. It doesn't bother the kids. It might bother other people, but it doesn't bother the kids who are being taught. The other thing in the classroom setting that's so powerful is peer tagging, where you divide your students into groups of 2 or 3 or however, and one student is practicing the specific tag point that he or she needs to learn, and the other student tags his or her peer. And then they switch places. So each one has the opportunity to observe and see what that movement really looks like, and then provide that positive reinforcement to their classmate. And then the classmate gets to hear all this great success he's achieving, and then their positions are changed. So the student who's doing the tagging gets to give reinforcement, and the student who's on the receiving end of the tagging earns the reinforcement and gets the success. So one is giving success, the other is receiving success. And then they switch places, and they both learn very well from that. So you have both students learning. It's very good in gym, because a lot of times they practice throwing, like one person is throwing and everybody's standing around watching. Whereas if you with TAGteach, you can have everybody practicing all the time. So it's very successful in that way.
Well, I think just the lesson of giving positive reinforcement is alone is valuable too. So I want to back up to the classroom example. So I want to make sure I understood. So were you talking about using the tagger for several students at once, or like in a classroom management context? And I could imagine if you could establish the tag as a reinforcer class-wide, the teacher could tag when there's moments of quiet, if the goal is to have a quieter lesson or something like that. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, well, I think that can be done. I've never been in that situation myself, but we have lots of stories in the TAGteach community about teachers using this system, and then they pull down a big bead, and after 5 beads or whatever, they have some kind of reinforcing activity for the whole class. Joan Orr uses this very successfully in this school where she volunteers in Canada, so she has a lot of examples of that she's told me over the years.
Wonderful. So let's
may I say something else?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Also, when the students are learning successfully and they're all engaged and they're giving each other positive reinforcement and learning, you're going to have a decrease in unpleasant behaviors, because, their performance and their confidence is being enhanced. So as they get happier, the problems become less. So.
Yeah, without question. So let's say we've excited people about this topic, right? And they want to learn more about it. They want to get training or what have you. What are some suggestions you have for someone to get the proper training and supervision to incorporate tag teaching into their practice?
Well, we have a lot of things, and you can find them on the TAGteach.com website for training. First of all, we have a free Fundamentals of TAGteach online course. So that is completely free. People can take that and get the basic introduction to the concepts of TAGteach, how to set up a tag point, all the principles of reinforcement. That's free for everybody. Then we have TAGteach, we have 2 levels of certification. We have level 1 certification. We have an online course for that. Or you can attend a seminar. And of course, those are paid. We also have level 2 seminars.
Got it.
So
and are these, I'm assuming.
There's more.
Oh, yeah, go ahead then.
Okay. On my website, which is a long, complicated website name, I can send it to you. But I have scads of free articles and free resources on my website. We have a free video course for autism parents on my website.
Awesome.
Dozens of free articles that describe how to use TAGteach for teaching, the safe walking skills, going to the grocery store, going to sleep at night. All of those articles are free. My Behavior Basics ebook is free as a download on my website.
Great. And we'll put that website in the show notes, but
right.
I know you said it's a long title, but just what is it?
Oh, okay.
What is your website?
autismchaos2calm.com.
Got it. autismchaos2calm.com. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And again, we'll link that up in the notes for this show. So this is going to be a very we'll have lots of stuff in the show notes for this particular episode. So Martha, I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. Is there anything else about tag teaching that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think it's so wonderful. It's so incredible, and it's so powerful. That keeps coming home to me every time. The child doesn't get used to it and then not respond anymore. I mean, assuming you're reinforcing appropriately. It is so powerful. You can teach the most challenged children with this in ways that you cannot without it. Because you can capture, and it's that capturing and shaping capability that you have with TAGteach that is so powerful. And we haven't had a chance to talk much about behavior shaping, but it's amazing. And it's every time we hear from people in the TAGteach community, they too are amazed at how quickly they can shape a behavior and get it from, nothing to something. So it's just a very powerful tool. And once again, to wrap up for children with autism, why it's so important is you can communicate without words. You don't put the burden of your own emotions and your own state of being on the child. And some research came out not too long ago that indicates another reason why TAGteach is so effective, and that children with autism have more internal micro movements, like we all have internal micro movements, but there appears to be that children with autism have more internal micro movements than their typically developing peers. So again, if you're trying to do verbal praise or something, like say that child has just done something, well, then that child's body has already done 10 or 12 other micro movements by the time you say, good job. So you can get right in there and tell that child exactly on time when he has done that great thing. And there's no other input for that child to absorb. It's just, okay, I did it. That's it. I'm done. And they know what they did right, and they'll do it again. So it's a very powerful tool. I think it makes reinforcement much more accurate. It makes it more timely. You can also reinforce much more intensively with the tagger than you can in any other way. I mean, I can reinforce my son. I can give reinforcement that I've gotten it up to 50 times per minute. And one of our dads in England, Shawnee Pogson, who works with his daughter Tink, he can reinforce at a rate of 112 per minute. So when you're flooding a child with that much success, you are really elevating that child. And
wow.
it's just wonderful. So it's the accuracy, the intensity, the shaping capability you have, the way you pull emotion out of the equation, the teaching situation. It just becomes very factual and everybody can focus better. So very powerful tool. I know there's that social validity problem. And again, I would just accept it and talk about it and say, let's give it a chance. It's not going to hurt anybody. Let's see how it goes. And we've heard many accounts where people have gone into classrooms or whatever. They're working with parents and the parents are skeptical, but a couple of demonstrations and the parents come around. They say, wow, this is really good.
Do you find a different mode of tagging makes it more palatable? In other words, if we use that tone generator that I saw Rick using in his demonstration video, would that do you see that as being more readily accepted?
Karen Pryor talks about that kind of thing because people have talked about that. She says, you want to be super accurate. You want this to be a quick, short sound so you can capture that specific single muscle movement that you want to increase. The problem with the tone, it can kind of be a little bit too long. And then you introduce uncertainty for the learner. Well, was it this little flinch of behavior or that little flinch of behavior that earned the tag? So people have to get over it.
Okay, all right. That's what I was thinking. Yay, nay on that. So
yeah, I sympathize because I felt that way too. When I was first starting and walking down the street with my son with the tagger, I thought people were going to come up and slug me for treating my kid like a dog. And my plan was to turn around and say, well, you deal with them then.
That's right. Yeah.
What you can do. But it never happened. I'd never been challenged in public and I use it all the time. And and one or two times I've had people ask me and I say, well, I'm using positive reinforcement with an event marker signal. And their jaws just drop open and they walk away. So
I see. All right. Well, Martha, you have more than likely excited a lot of people about this topic. And I'm hoping that they go to the show notes of this episode and look up all those many, many references that you mentioned, and we'll have it all there at behavioralobservations.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been very, very educational for me, and I look forward to diving into this more personally myself. So thanks again.
Oh, thank you.
All right. That's a great way to end. All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.